Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world of drafty stone halls, creaking floorboards, and beds that are more crowded than comfortable. You're not alone under those patchy wool blankets. There's a snoring cousin to your left, a cracked chamber pot at your feet, and, curled neatly behind your knees, a warm and slightly damp dog who smells faintly of turnips. You're in a medieval bedroom, and yes, it's every bit as unglamorous as it sounds. This isn't the kind of chamber that gets written about in romances or painted in tapestries. This is the real thing. The scratchy, smoky, sometimes flea-ridden cocoon where ordinary folks try to get a little sleep while sharing their space with family, vermin, and, more often than not, animals of the four-legged variety. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. I always love seeing how many of us are drifting off together across the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle over to your half of the lumpy mattress, if you're lucky enough to have one, and tuck your legs in as far as they'll go without kneeing your sister in the ribs. The smell of smoke, unwashed linen, and that inexplicably wet part of the wall fills your nose. But at least it's familiar. Here in the Middle Ages, the bedroom isn't sacred or separate. It's survival. Beds are shared, floors are drafty, and privacy is more of a theological idea than a practical one. You aren't tucking your dog in for emotional support. You're both using each other as heating devices with feelings. Mainstream history tends to overlook this nightly coziness. We hear about crusades and coronations, not about peasants spooning with goats. But the truth is, nightly life was shaped as much by climate and livestock as by kings and wars. Now, let's talk beds. A peasant's bed, if one existed, was probably stuffed with straw or rags and covered with coarse wool or linen. No memory foam, no box springs. If you were lucky, your bed was lifted off the ground so fewer rats could scurry across your feet while you slept. If you were less lucky, your bed was the ground, and you weren't alone. That bed was probably shared by multiple people, siblings, cousins, even neighbors during hard winters. But beyond the humans were the animals: dogs, cats, chickens, ferrets, goats, and in some cases, a pig or two. Now you're probably wondering, why the animals? Did people love their pets that much back then? Well, yes and no. For one thing, animals gave off heat. This is not a metaphor. In homes where insulation meant stuffing straw in a wall crack and winters lasted 9 months, the warmth of a living creature beside you could be the difference between comfort and chattering teeth. But it wasn't just warmth. It was company. In a world without electric lights, books, or YouTube videos to whisper you to sleep, a soft snore from a curled-up mutt was the medieval version of a bedtime podcast. A heartbeat beside yours. Something alive and dependable. And there was no real boundary between people space and animal space. Most folks lived in one-room homes where the fire smoked up the rafters, and the goat had as much right to the floor as you did. Doors were expensive. Partitions, luxury. So you got used to it. Now, historians still argue whether medieval people considered their animals companions or tools. Was your dog a friend, or just an alarm system with fur? But as we'll see through this story, the answer may be both. Let's not forget that a lot of these creatures were working animals. Your cat caught mice. Your dog barked at thieves. Your donkey, well, he got out of sleeping with you by having his own corner, lucky guy. But the idea of a pet just for the sake of affection? That was mostly for the wealthy, though we'll meet a few surprising exceptions to that rule as we go along. You yawn. The fire's gone out. The coals glow faint red, then fade. In the darkness, the room creaks and breathes. The dog sighs and shifts beside you. The pig grunts softly in his sleep. You're not alone. And oddly enough, you don't want to be. You wake to your toes, tingling from the cold and the unmistakable smell of wet fur. Your dog, possibly a spaniel, though breeds weren't quite as fixed back then, is curled into the crook of your knees, radiating heat like a medieval hot water bottle with a twitching nose. His body is warm, a contrast to the biting air that creeps in through the cracked wooden shutters. You shift slightly, careful not to disturb him because, let's face it, you need that warmth more than he does. There's frost collecting on the inside of the window, and the fire burned itself out hours ago. This is winter in medieval Europe. Not the snow-dusted postcard kind, the teeth-chattering, toe-blackening kind. It's not just you and your pup. In fact, across villages and towns from England to Bohemia, families huddle together in bed with their animals. People didn't call it pet co-sleeping. They just called it staying alive. See, homes back then weren't insulated. Most had walls of wood or wattle and daub, essentially mud packed between sticks. Roofs were thatched, often leaking. If your chimney was fancy enough to draw smoke, that was a blessing. Otherwise, the smoke from your fire pooled above your head and sometimes crept back down, offering a fine cough to go with your sleep. Blankets? Rare. Expensive. Often coarse wool or old layers of whatever cloth wasn't needed elsewhere. So into the bed you went, with everything that could generate heat. Brothers, sisters, grandma, and yes, even that limping old dog with a droopy tail who'd followed you home 3 winters ago and never left. Here's the thing. Medieval folks didn't think twice about it. Sleeping with your dog wasn't odd or unhygienic. It was resourceful, and honestly, it probably smelled better than your cousin's feet. Mainstream historians often note that dogs and cats were allowed into bedchambers, especially among the poor. In wealthier households, it was more selective. Lapdogs were bred precisely to be portable heat sources. In fact, one English text from the 15th century describes small spaniels as comforters for noblewomen suffering chills or melancholy. Their job was to keep the lap warm, and perhaps the spirit too. And this wasn't a hidden behavior. Portraits show ladies of status with tiny dogs perched beside them on cushions. The line between accessory and comfort companion was already blurring. Now here's your quirky tidbit of the night. In some particularly cold monasteries in northern Europe, monks kept little dogs, not for play, but to sleep under their robes during bitter nights. Imagine that. Pious silence, strict rules, and one smug little pup nestled under a habit. Historians still debate whether this was widespread or just a few particularly cold and lonely monks being extra cozy. Either way, it paints a curious picture of devotion and warmth. But for peasants like you, it wasn't optional. It was essential. Your dog wasn't pampered. He worked the fields, chased off wolves when he could, and probably had a flea collection impressive enough to earn its own fiefdom. But at night, he curled beside you, and the mutual benefit was undeniable. You provided scraps, scratches, and the occasional crust of bread. He offered warmth, a sense of security, and the kind of low, vibrating sigh only a dog can produce, the one that makes your ribs feel softer. Even cats, usually the aloof members of the medieval household, had their own form of nighttime loyalty. While they weren't likely to snuggle, many curled at the foot of beds or burrowed into hay piles near human warmth. There are letters from medieval nuns complaining about cats climbing across them at night, and others who delighted in the company. And then there's this. Sleeping with animals helped prevent theft. No, seriously. Before alarms and bolt locks, a growl or bark could mean the difference between waking to an intruder or waking to missing shoes. A dog's hearing is sharp. A cat's attention to movement, even sharper. In some ways, medieval families had the first organic security systems. You turn slightly in your straw mattress, shifting your legs beneath the thin blanket. The dog makes a little huffing noise but doesn't stir. You wonder what he's dreaming about. Probably that rabbit he chased 3 days ago. Or maybe just a really big leftover bone. Out in the darkness you hear a rooster crow. Confused, probably. Or just dramatic. It's still hours before dawn, but the animals are always on their own schedules. The room smells like damp fur, dried herbs from the rafters, and the faint tang of wood smoke. But there's also a strange coziness to it, a sense of shared life between humans and creatures, all piled into the same breath of warmth. You might think, from your modern blanket cocoon, that this all sounds chaotic. But here, wrapped in the sounds of breathing and snoring, it feels grounding, real, soft in its own scratchy way. And besides, tomorrow's another cold day. You're going to need each other. The sun isn't up yet, but the mice are. You can hear their tiny nails pattering across the beams above, their little feet tapping out a kind of nocturnal Morse code that only they understand. They're fast, clever, and absolutely determined to get into your flour sack before morning. Luckily, you're not the only one who hears them. Beside the hearth, with her eyes half closed but ears still twitching, is your cat. Small, gray, and not particularly affectionate, unless it's cold or she wants fish. She's curled like a cinnamon roll on a rickety stool, pretending to sleep. But one twitch, one whisper of movement in the thatch above, and she's off like a shadow, a blur with claws. You smile, even though you're still half asleep, because in this house, your cat isn't decoration. She's the frontline defense against an enemy that never sleeps: rats. Medieval homes were open to everything: mice in the walls, rats in the grain, fleas in the hay. You didn't own a cat because she was cute. You kept her because she was the most efficient, low-maintenance exterminator you could find. Mainstream historical records confirm it. Cats were treasured in medieval towns, ports, and castles alike for their rodent-killing prowess. Sailors brought them aboard ships to protect stores. Monasteries let them roam to guard manuscripts from gnawing. Even royal courts made space for them, sometimes begrudgingly, sometimes with pride. But here's a quirky twist. Not everyone agreed cats were just practical. In some parts of Europe, especially during periods of intense religious fear, cats were linked with witches, heresy, or the devil himself. Black cats, in particular, were thought to carry ill omens. But even then, most people still kept one around. Because when it came down to a clean conscience or clean food, the food usually won. Historians still argue whether this superstition actually affected everyday cat ownership, or if it was more about church rhetoric than peasant reality. After all, sermons didn't chase mice. Tabby did. And cats weren't the only nocturnal co-workers. Small dogs were often kept indoors specifically to bark at disturbances. Not bark at burglars necessarily. They'd bark at anything. Leaves moving, bread falling, dreams. But that unpredictability was part of the charm. A yappy little terrier might wake the whole house over a feather's shift in the dark, but at least you'd know something happened. Even ferrets and weasels made the occasional appearance in domestic life, particularly in parts of Eastern Europe. If trained, and that's a big if, they could snake through burrows and chase out rats, adding a kind of twitchy, slinky energy to the home. Imagine trying to sleep while that little fur missile races over your chest mid-hunt. Cozy, right? But back to your cat. She returns after a successful mission, a limp mouse dangling from her mouth like a trophy. She drops it near the hearth and walks off without so much as a glance. Medieval cats didn't need applause. They worked alone, always had, always would. There's evidence from illuminated manuscripts and merchant inventories that cats were often included in household records, not with names usually, but as one mouser or gray cat kept near grain room. Practical, unsentimental, but still acknowledged. In some towns there were even small cat doors built into wooden gates or bakery walls. The baker's assistant would sleep above the ovens, a cat curled beside him, both warmed by the bread fire. One for warmth, one for pest control, a quiet agreement. It's strange to think how many lives depended on these animals, without fanfare or praise, just the steady, stealthy presence of whiskers and instinct. And maybe, just maybe, you whispered to her sometimes, just a little thank you, as you curled back under your blanket and listened to her purring by your ear, the sound deep and rhythmic, like the world humming to itself in contentment. Of course, sometimes the cat got ideas. One historical account from a woman in the 13th century describes her cat kneading her scalp with such vigor she feared it was preparing to bury something there. But that was the deal: warmth, food, and the occasional weird behavior in exchange for safe food and uninterrupted sleep. You roll over, the dog at your knees, the cat now perched somewhere near your hip. A tail flicks against your arm. Another mouse scurries, but this time, no one moves. You're all too tired. The cat'll get it in the morning. Probably. In the quiet that follows, it's easy to forget the world outside. The thatch roof, the icy wind sneaking under the door, the flicker of doubt in the back of your mind about whether the grain barrel is still full. For now, in this bed that's more hay than mattress, with pets that are more colleagues than cuddly companions, you're surrounded, guarded, safe, in the medieval way. Which is to say, surrounded by a sleepy dog, a possibly judgmental cat, and at least one rat who's thinking maybe not tonight. You wake again, just barely, to the creak of a board and the feel of soft paws treading across your blanket. It's your dog this time, repositioning himself with the grace of a clumsy child. Half on the bed, half on someone's legs, tail thumping lazily. You open one eye. He's nestled now against your belly like he owns the place, his chin propped on a fold of rough wool. You scratch behind his ear, and he lets out a sigh that could deflate a bread loaf. But this isn't just a good boy looking for belly rubs. This little dog, small enough to curl inside a basket, is something more than a working hound. He's a mark of status. In the medieval world, animals weren't just tools or companions. They were also symbols. Symbols of wealth, of taste, of connections. Among the nobility, owning a small, well-groomed lapdog said things about you. Things like, "I don't need this dog to hunt or guard. I just have it. For company. For warmth. For style." Ladies of the court were often painted with these tiny companions. Not the scruffy mutts of the countryside, but delicate greyhounds, Italian toy breeds, or terrier types with soft coats and high-strung personalities. Mainstream history even gives us names. Mary, Queen of Scots, famously had a Skye Terrier who hid beneath her skirts during her execution. Anne of Brittany had an entire entourage of lapdogs, each pampered with its own little pillow. But it wasn't just about comfort or cuteness. These dogs were portable prestige. A well-kept lapdog told others that you didn't just own animals. You had time to pamper them, that you had servants to feed it, someone to brush it, and a lap available to warm it. And here's your quirky detail of the night. Some nobles gave their lapdogs tiny garments, embroidered cloaks, velvet collars. One bishop even complained in a letter about a duchess dressing her dog better than most peasants dressed their children. Historians still argue whether these dogs served any real purpose, or if they were just status props like bejeweled goblets and imported spices. Some say the dogs were emotional companions in arranged marriages and lonely towers. Others suggest they were simply very fluffy accessories. But whatever their purpose, they were often allowed in the bedchamber. Sometimes even the bed. In fact, one French noblewoman reportedly refused to sleep without her dog pressed against her feet, insisting she couldn't fall asleep without its sweet snoring. Romantic? Perhaps. Smelly? Almost certainly. Meanwhile, you, in your slightly less noble surroundings, still understand the comfort. Your dog isn't royal. He doesn't wear a cloak or answer to a Latin name. But he does keep your knees warm. And in this world, that's its own kind of nobility. You roll onto your side, careful not to squish him. His ear flops over your arm. He smells like hay and yesterday's stew, but in a familiar, not altogether unpleasant way. Elsewhere in the house, someone coughs. A child stirs. The fire crackles weakly, and the dog, sensing you've moved too much, lets out a dramatic huff and shifts a whole inch away, as if to say, "Don't ruin this for us." And yes, there were other kinds of animal status symbols in the medieval world. Falcons, for instance, birds of prey tethered to noblemen's wrists, kept in special chambers, trained for the hunt. But they weren't sleeping partners. You didn't curl up next to a hawk. Probably. The lapdog, on the other hand, belonged to the world of closeness, of domestic space, of warmth and intimacy, in a world that was cold, political, and full of drafts in both the walls and the court. You think about this as the dog shifts again, his little spine pressing against your stomach. He's not ornamental. Not really. He's a heartbeat against yours. A breathing presence. Some nobles even left their dogs money in their wills. Imagine that. Your life's work, left to a creature who's now chewing on your slipper. But it wasn't about logic. It was about attachment. Sleep is when the armor came off, both literal and emotional. And in those quiet, vulnerable hours, the presence of something alive and loyal mattered more than status. You close your eyes again. The room breathes with you. The dog shifts his paw over your wrist. In this moment, with the world outside frozen and dark, the warmth of that furry companion feels like the only thing truly yours. You wake not from a sound, but from a smell. Earthy, sharp, and definitely barn-adjacent. Your eyes flutter open. The straw mattress creaks under your elbow, and there, standing beside the bed like he owns it, is a pig. A pig. His nose twitches. He grunts once. Then, without ceremony, he plops himself near the hearth, curls his legs beneath him like a dog, and shuts his eyes. You sigh, because this isn't new. Welcome to the wonderful world of livestock indoors, the medieval edition. See, in your modern mind, there's probably a clear line between humans and farm animals. Barns are for cows. Beds are for people. But that tidy distinction didn't exist in the same way in medieval Europe, especially for peasants. Livestock were part of the household, not just in theory, in square footage. Your pig lives in your house. So does the goat. Maybe a few chickens. You've swept droppings off the floor more than once and probably stepped in something barefoot once or twice. It's not ideal, but it's also not weird. Everyone does it. Why? Well, there are a few reasons. First, warmth. Animals give off body heat. In a freezing winter, one snoring pig in a corner could raise the room's temperature just enough to matter. Like a living space heater, slightly smellier, considerably louder. Second, protection. Livestock was valuable, sometimes the most valuable thing a family owned. Letting your pig sleep outside was like leaving your purse on the front porch. Theft, wild animals, or even simple misadventure could leave you hungry come spring. And third, space. You don't have a barn, maybe a lean-to, maybe a stable if you're lucky, but in many one-room homes the animals lived right beside you. Your bed, their hay, one room, one life. Mainstream historians often note that the average peasant home in 13th and 14th century Europe was a hybrid living space. People in one half, animals in the other, separated, if at all, by a knee-high wooden plank or rope. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked. And here's your quirky tidbit. In certain regions of Scandinavia and Scotland, cows were brought into the family room during winter, not just kept nearby, into the living area. Their breath warmed the air. Their bodies blocked the wind. Their hooves. Well, hopefully, you had a broom. Some monasteries even allowed livestock indoors on certain feast days as symbolic guests, though that tradition, historians still argue, may have been more legend than liturgy. Back to your pig. He snores like a kettle beginning to boil. It's rhythmic, actually. Soothing, in a strange way. He's not particularly clean, but neither is the floor. You gave up on spotless long ago. In this world, cleanliness is less about sparkle and more about not catching something fatal. And despite his occasional flatulence and tendency to chew shoes, you kind of like the guy. He eats leftovers. He's company. He once chased a beggar, which you definitely shouldn't have laughed at, but you did. You glance over at your dog, still curled against your legs, unfazed. The cat glares from the windowsill as if saying, "This is exactly why I only tolerate you." Sometimes you wonder how it is that you sleep at all, with the creaking, the scratching, the breathing, and the barnyard choir. But somehow, it works. The hum of life in the room, noisy, messy, chaotic, is also reassuring. There's something deeply human about falling asleep surrounded by other living beings. even if one of them squeals in his sleep and smells like damp moss. It's not just peasants either. Even wealthier households had animal companions in strange places. Royal hunting dogs often slept in chambers, sometimes even on beds. A noble's prized falcon might perch near the foot of the bed, hooded and still. Some accounts describe monkeys, squirrels, and parrots brought to sleep chambers for entertainment or comfort. But in your house, there's no luxury in the arrangement. It's all about survival. You share space because there's no space not to share. You keep animals close because they're your assets, your warmth, your alarm system, your food supply, eventually. And, on the quietest nights, your lullaby. The pig shifts, letting out a snort so loud you jump slightly. The dog growls in his sleep. The cat doesn't move. Of course. You pull the blanket tighter, nestling in. Somewhere under all the noise and smells, there's a rhythm to it all, a harmony of creatures sharing warmth in the dark. This is your version of peace. It's still dark, but now the sounds of the house have shifted. The fire crackles a little louder. Someone turns over in the bed. A cough echoes from the far end of the room, followed by the unmistakable thump of a chicken hopping down from a beam overhead. You blink. Yes, a chicken. She hops down casually, fluffs her feathers, and wanders across the floor with the confident strut of someone who owns the place, which in a way she does. Because this bed you're lying in, it's not yours alone, not even close. You're sharing it with your sister, your cousin, the toddler who somehow always ends up sideways with cold feet pressed to your ribs, a dog, a pig in the corner, and a rotating cast of chickens who seem to have no concept of personal boundaries. It's not a bed, it's a community, and you're used to it. In medieval times, communal sleeping wasn't just common. It was expected. It was how people survived. Entire families shared a bed, not out of affection, necessarily, but out of necessity. Beds were expensive. Rooms were scarce. Heat was precious. So you all piled in, layer by layer, like a particularly fidgety human lasagna. Historians often describe this as bundling, not in the romanticized sense of courtship rituals, but literally bundling bodies together for warmth, safety, and sleep. In poorer homes, there might be one bed for 6 people, sometimes fewer beds than people, period. And this wasn't limited to peasants. Even apprentices in city homes shared beds with fellow workers. Travelers shared with strangers at inns. Some homes had what were called truckle beds, small pull-out beds stored beneath larger ones. Think medieval bunk beds, but with more coughing and less personal space. In your case, the bed is little more than a wood frame stuffed with straw and old cloth, layered with thin blankets, and on a good night, a wool throw that doesn't smell too much like cheese. And in this shared sleep, something interesting happens. The line between family and function begins to blur. You all warm each other. You breathe in sync. You turn over in waves, a choreographed midnight shuffle that no one talks about, but everyone participates in. It might sound strange from a modern perspective, like a sleepover that never ends. But it wasn't about bonding. It was about getting through the night without freezing. Love didn't always enter into it. Sometimes you actually didn't like the person beside you. But their body heat? You could tolerate that. Here's a quirky little gem. Some medieval households even rotated bed partners based on age and temperature. Children were often placed between adults. Older folks closer to the fire. Animals wedged at the foot or pressed to the outer sides. It was less a bed, more a strategic survival formation. And historians still argue whether people actually slept better this way or simply tolerated it out of sheer necessity. Did communal sleeping foster a sense of shared resilience, or did it just mean more elbows to the face? The answer might be both. And don't forget the animals. Your dog shifts again, nestling closer to the toddler. He knows the little one needs more warmth. The chicken, meanwhile, has decided the blanket corner is now her personal throne. You sigh, but you don't push her off. She's laid eggs there before, warm ones. In the background, your uncle mumbles in his sleep, Someone else starts to snore. The pig in the corner lets out a soft, purring grunt. Yes, pigs can purr. And rolls onto his side. It's chaos. But it's familiar. And there's a kind of intimacy in it. Not just emotional closeness, but physical proximity that defines medieval life. There are no secrets in this bed. No silent nights. Just a collection of hearts and paws and feathers trying to make it until morning. You wiggle your feet to find a warm spot. Your sister groans. The toddler kicks you in the shin. The dog sighs dramatically, then licks someone's elbow. It's all part of the choreography. And in that cluttered, snuffling elbow-in-the-ribs closeness, something surprisingly beautiful happens. You fall asleep again. Not despite the noise, but because of it. But it's nearly dawn now, though the sun hasn't yet cracked the horizon. You're drifting in that hazy place between sleep and waking, the one where you're not sure if the dog is snoring or if that's just the wind sneaking through the shutters again. You shift slightly. The blanket itches. The straw pokes. The pig grumbles in his sleep. And somewhere above, the rafters creak like they're whispering to each other. Then you hear it, a quiet, almost reverent voice in the corner of the room. It's your grandmother. She's murmuring her morning prayers, one hand resting on her rosary, the other absent-mindedly petting the cat curled in her lap. The cat purrs softly. It's moments like this that make you wonder, does the cat understand? Does it have a soul? You're not alone in that question. In the medieval world, the relationship between humans and animals wasn't just physical. It was deeply philosophical, especially when it came to questions of the soul, sin, and salvation. Did animals feel love? Regret? Could they sin? Could they be saved? Mainstream theology said no. According to the dominant Christian doctrine of the time, animals lacked rational souls. They were God's creation, sure, but they weren't made in His image. They operated on instinct, not intellect, and certainly not spiritual awareness. But not everyone was convinced. Medieval sermons and writings are filled with contradictions. Some theologians claimed animals were mere automatons, animated by divine breath but not touched by grace. Others noted the loyalty of dogs, the patience of oxen, the supposed self-sacrifice of pelicans, yes, pelicans, as signs of deeper purpose. Historians still argue whether these contradictions were theological loopholes or genuine spiritual quandaries. Some say the church left space for ambiguity. Others believe the ambiguity came from the people themselves, trying to reconcile doctrine with the creatures they loved. After all, how do you look into the eyes of a dog who hasn't left your side in 10 winters, who curled beside your sickbed, who mourned at your mother's grave, and still insist he has no soul? Even saints seemed uncertain. Saint Francis of Assisi, for example, famously preached to birds. He called animals his brothers and sisters. Not metaphors, actual kin. Some monks followed his lead, speaking to squirrels, blessing fish before releasing them, naming beetles they found in their cells. And then there were the stories, quirky tales passed down through word of mouth, where loyal dogs waited outside monasteries for their masters, where cats curled around dying abbots, where animals, just for a moment, seemed to understand everything. Your grandmother believes it. You can tell. She finishes her prayer and leans her head against the cat's flank, whispering something only the cat hears. The cat purrs louder, stretching in slow motion like a little furry sunrise. That's not to say everyone agreed. One 14th century bishop railed against the sentimental elevation of beasts, declaring it heresy to imagine dogs in heaven. But even as he thundered from the pulpit, you have to wonder, had he ever fallen asleep with a warm spaniel tucked behind his knees? Because the people, they weren't always theologians. They were cold, tired, hopeful, and deeply fond of the creatures that shared their beds and burdens. You glance around the room again. The dog is awake now, stretching his legs. The pig grunts. The chicken flaps up to her perch. And the cat? She gives you a slow blink that feels knowing. Maybe it's just the sleep in your eyes. Maybe it's the quiet before chores begin. Or maybe, just maybe, it's something older, something unspoken. A connection older than doctrine, deeper than ritual. You lie back down, pulling the blanket to your chin. Because honestly, soul or no soul, you're pretty sure that cat just blessed you. The monastery is silent mostly. Stone walls absorb the morning chill, and the faint scent of candle wax clings to the air like a memory. You've come here early, slipping into the cloister before the sun climbs too high, expecting quiet contemplation and orderly steps. But what you get instead is a blur of fur bolting across the flagstone corridor, skidding on polished floor, tail wagging like a banner. A dog, in a monastery. You pause. Surely this is a mistake. Then, from around the corner, comes a monk, robes fluttering, sandals slapping, face flushed. He calls, in a whisper shout only monks can master, "Thomas, come back!" The dog darts behind a pillar. You blink, because apparently, even in the most solemn places of worship, even in the most rule-bound orders, there was still room for a little mischief, and a few wagging tails. Now, in theory, monastic life was supposed to be austere. Silence, discipline, poverty. According to many official rules, like those laid out in the Benedictine order, animals, especially dogs, were distractions, earthly attachments, noisemakers. They didn't belong among sacred texts and chanting brothers. But reality, much softer. Many monasteries across Europe had resident dogs. Some were guard dogs. Others were hunting dogs owned collectively or by individual monks. But the most curious were the companion dogs, the ones that padded through the cloister, curled under desks, and occasionally barked during matins. One story tells of a Cistercian monk who trained his spaniel to bow its head during grace. Another involves a greyhound that reportedly followed a scribe from scriptorium to dining hall, placing its paw on the bench to signal it wanted a crumb of bread. That might sound made up, but there are enough scattered records, paintings, and marginalia scribbles to suggest it wasn't all that rare. In fact, some monastic communities even had unwritten allowances for quiet animals. Dogs that didn't bark too much, cats that kept the mouse population down, birds that chirped softly during morning walks. Quirky detail time. One abbot in 12th century Normandy wrote a letter of apology after his dog stole a visiting bishop's loaf of bread during supper. The bishop laughed, thankfully. But the letter still survives. And the dog's name? Crispin. Historians still argue whether these monastic pets were formal members of the household or tolerated trespassers. Some claim they were allowed in as part of practical necessity, guarding, rat-catching, warmth. Others suggest the monks simply needed companionship in their isolated routines. You, standing here now, watch as Thomas the dog finally relents, padding back toward the monk who scoops him up with a weary sigh and a kiss on the nose he probably hopes no one saw. The scene is oddly tender. Two creatures cloaked in silence, bound not by obedience, but by affection. And it makes sense. Monastic life was strict, but also deeply human. Days filled with ritual and repetition. Hours of prayer. Long stretches of copying manuscripts, cleaning floors, tending to bees, or boiling herbs. In such stillness, even a flick of a tail could bring joy. Some monks wrote poems to their pets, short verses tucked between Latin prayers. A few cat-loving scribes even left doodles in the margins, tiny sketches of curled-up felines or paw prints walking across a half-finished psalm. You glance to your left and spot an older monk feeding bits of bread to a robin on the windowsill. He doesn't speak, just smiles, one hand outstretched. So maybe dogs and cats weren't just tolerated. Maybe they were a quiet rebellion, a small indulgence in a world of rules. A reminder that warmth and presence, even if covered in fur, had value beyond doctrine. The bell tolls once, low and long, a call to prayer. The dog perks up, tail thumping against the monk's robe. The monk sighs again, gives a scratch behind the ears and whispers, "Stay here. Be good." And Thomas naturally follows him anyway. You smile and continue walking. Because even in sacred spaces, maybe especially in sacred spaces. A wagging tail still means you're not alone. You smell the lavender before you see the silk. A whiff of sweetness, not quite natural, clinging to polished wood and something fainter. Fur, maybe? Then the curtain lifts, and you step into the royal nursery. It's warmer than most rooms in the castle, likely on purpose. The fire is tended constantly, and thick tapestries hang over the stone to keep the drafts at bay. But it's not the warmth or the glimmering canopy bed that catches your eye. It's the squirrel. Yes, a squirrel, curled like a cinnamon bun atop a velvet pillow, wearing what appears to be a tiny gold thread collar, sleeping, lightly snoring, beside a child who will one day be king. And suddenly, the animal stories you've heard feel less like folktales and more like furniture inventory. This is the strange truth about medieval royalty. Animals weren't just tools or pets. They were companions, performers, symbols, and sometimes full-blown political props. Tiny dogs, monkeys, rabbits, birds, even exotic creatures like parrots or tortoises. They all found homes in royal chambers. But nothing quite matched the odd charm of a personal squirrel, raised from infancy and taught to eat politely from a golden spoon. Mainstream chronicles mention these creatures not as side notes, but as part of daily life. Margaret of Anjou had a pet lion, though hopefully not in her bed. Eleanor of Aquitaine reportedly gifted exotic animals to allies as gestures of power and generosity. One 15th century prince received a white ferret so precious it was carried on a silk cushion, like a baby. These weren't random whims. Royal pets were statements. To have an exotic animal meant access to wealth, to trade routes, to rare wonders from faraway lands. A lady with a jeweled falcon or a bejeweled greyhound wasn't just showing affection. She was showing status, too. But it went deeper. Children of royal blood were often raised alongside animals, not just for entertainment, but for character shaping. The loyalty of a dog, the cleverness of a bird, the calm presence of a rabbit, all were considered tools for molding temperament. Some believed animals could soothe tempers, sharpen observation, even protect against nightmares. Here's your quirky fact. In one royal nursery inventory from the 14th century, a note appears about a songbird in cage to be placed beside crib to ease colic, a medieval lullaby brought to you by feathers. Historians still debate whether these pets truly lived in the royal bedchamber, or if such records simply exaggerated noble extravagance. Were the animals really that pampered, or were they rotated out before the chamberlain arrived? Interpretations vary, but you, standing in this nursery, believe it, because the squirrel just stretched, blinked lazily, and snuggled closer to the tiny hand resting nearby. In that moment, it feels real, and there's something quietly human about it all. In rooms built for war planning and succession, there's still space for a dog to curl under a cradle or a bird to sing at sunrise. Even kings, it seems, needed something soft to wake up to. You move quietly through the chamber. At the far end, an older servant gently brushes a puppy's fur, humming a song you vaguely remember. The cradle creaks. The child stirs. The squirrel blinks, climbs to the edge, and pauses as if on duty. And you realize, royal or peasant, drafty cottage or gilded tower, the bond between people and animals is surprisingly democratic. Everyone needs comfort. Everyone needs company. Even those born with crowns already polished. You step back through the curtain as the fire pops softly behind you. The squirrel yawns. The future king sleeps on. And in the hush of velvet and gold and gently snoring creatures, you feel the warmth of something universal, the need to feel safe beside something that breathes. You've got a fever, not the dramatic kind, not the sweating, wild-eyed, call the priest kind, just the slow, creeping, medieval kind, the one that settles in your bones and makes the world feel like it's rocking, even when you're lying completely still. You're wrapped in your blanket, the fire's gone out again, and someone tried to help by stuffing more hay under your head. It smells like last week's soup. But then, from the end of the bed, you feel a gentle weight. Your cat. She doesn't say anything, of course, but she climbs up, curls into a tight little loaf beside your ribs, and begins to purr, a soft, vibrating hum that seems to reach right down to your aching joints. And you realize this is the treatment. Because in the medieval world, animals weren't just companions. Sometimes they were medicine. Yes, actual, honest-to-goodness prescriptions. Mainstream medieval medicine, as you might expect, was a little bit science, a lot of guesswork, and just a touch of magic. Treatments involved herbs, bleeding, leeches, and prayers. But in many regions, sleeping with animals, especially cats or small dogs, was considered genuinely helpful for ailments ranging from headaches to melancholy. Physicians recommended it. Healers insisted on it. People believed it. One 14th century English manuscript offers this pearl of wisdom. A little dogga of smooth hair placed upon the stomach of one ill shall draw out the fume and quiet the bile. In simpler terms, sleeping with a warm dog on your belly might help with indigestion. Oddly enough, not completely off base. Modern studies, you didn't hear this from me, show that animal warmth, rhythmic breathing, and companionship can lower stress, ease tension, and even regulate heart rate. But medieval folks didn't need peer-reviewed journals. They had experience. And a lot of that experience was practical. You had a cough? Someone handed you thyme tea and told you to lie down with the spaniel. Cold feet? Tuck them under the cat. Sad? Hug the goat. Though, admittedly, results may vary. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some believed that cats could literally absorb sickness. They thought the animal would draw out the bad humors or vapors from the body. As a result, if your cat suddenly fell ill after you recovered, some saw it as proof the treatment had worked. Others just called it bad luck. Of course, historians still argue whether these ideas were symbolic, spiritual, or just desperate hope wrapped in fur. Some think it was rooted in humoral theory, the idea that health depended on balancing the body's fluids, and that animal warmth helped temper the imbalance. Others think people simply noticed. When I'm sick and my dog is here, I feel better. And you do. Right now, as you lie there sniffling into your blanket, the soft thud of a dog's tail on the floor and the steady purr of your cat beside you are doing more than any herb ever has. You close your eyes. In royal courts, noblewomen did the same. They cradled lapdogs during migraines, let squirrels nap against their aching arms. Monks with sore joints were often excused from prayers if they were in the company of a beast for warmth. Even battlefield medics, such as they were, sometimes carried small animals in their bags, offering soldiers something to hold as they shook from pain or fever. Not all of it worked, of course. There were plenty of folk remedies that were more superstition than solution. Sleeping with a chicken on your stomach to cure gout? Probably not great. Letting a ferret crawl through your shirt to chase away chills? Questionable, at best. But even when the medicine missed the mark, the comfort didn't. You stir. The cat lifts her head, eyes half open. She blinks at you, then returns to her loaf position. The dog inches closer, resting his chin across your ankle. It's warm now. Not hot, but enough. You can breathe again. Your heartbeat slows, and as you drift back towards sleep, you realize maybe the best medicine isn't a potion or poultice. Maybe it's just not being sick alone. You're dreaming now. Or maybe not. It's hard to tell in this low, flickering light, with the cat still nestled at your ribs and the dog's paws twitching in sleep beside you. But something about the way his paws twitch, soft, rhythmic, like running in place, makes you wonder. Do dogs dream? And more curiously, did medieval people wonder the same thing? The short answer? Absolutely. They may not have had brain scans or veterinary journals, but medieval folks were observant. They watched their dogs bark in their sleep, paws moving like they were chasing something just out of reach. They listened to cats make tiny murmuring noises in the dark, curled into impossible positions with whiskers trembling. And they asked themselves the same question you are now. What do they see? Mainstream medieval texts don't dive into the neuroscience of dreams, of course, But the literature, poetry, and even some medical manuscripts mention animal sleep with surprising curiosity. One 13th century French poem describes a hound whimpering through a dream as though hunting a deer too far to catch. Another text, more philosophical, asks whether animals carry memories in their slumber, as humans do. And here's your quirky tidbit. In medieval bestiaries, those charming, often wildly inaccurate illustrated animal encyclopedias, there are entries that suggest animals have intentions, emotions, even loyalty that continues beyond death. One legend, often retold in village tales, tells of a dog that laid on its master's grave each night, and once, supposedly, barked in its sleep so fiercely that villagers came running, only to find a thief nearby. Coincidence? Divine warning? No one agreed, but they buried the dog beside its master after that, just in case. Historians still argue whether these accounts reflect genuine belief in animal consciousness or are simply anthropomorphic storytelling. Some say people saw animals as spiritual mirrors, reflecting back our own longings, fears, and dreams. Others believe that medieval culture, despite its hierarchies, always left room for wonder, especially where animals were concerned, and that wonder shows up everywhere. In medieval paintings, you'll sometimes find dogs sleeping at the foot of the Virgin Mary's bed. In illuminated manuscripts, a monk's carefully inked cat sleeps between lines of Latin. In lullabies, birds are asked to hush their songs so infants can sleep peacefully, birds who perhaps have lullabies of their own. There's a kind of soft humility in that, because in an age where humans saw themselves as the center of divine design, it's touching to find scraps of curiosity, tiny footnotes and big ideas that ask, but what about the animals? Do they dream of fields? Of food? Of us? You glance down again. Your dog lets out a muffled woof, barely a breath, and rolls onto his back, legs splayed like a creature utterly without fear. The cat opens one eye, glares at the ceiling as if offended, and promptly tucks her nose back under her tail. You smile, settling in again. The fire pops, the pig snorts, someone down the hall coughs, the chicken shifts on her perch, and all around you a house of dreaming creatures murmurs into the night. You close your eyes, wondering if their dreams are better than yours. Maybe simpler, maybe not. But either way, it's a comfort to know you're not the only one wandering in sleep tonight. Morning finally begins to push its pale fingers through the slats in the shutter. The rooster, who has absolutely no sense of timing, crows for the third time that hour. And this time, nobody bothers to shush him. You're awake anyway, though not entirely willing to admit it. Your dog stretches first, front legs out, hips high, mouth yawning wide enough to reveal every tooth he's ever grown. The cat, naturally, waits a moment longer, lifts her head with a glare that suggests she was about to get up anyway. But then you hear something you haven't heard in a while. Crying. Not human. A woman is outside. Soft, low sobs, muffled by layers of fabric and shame. You slip out from under the blankets, careful not to disturb your small animal mountain, and pad toward the window. Through the gap in the shutters, you glimpse her, a noble woman, kneeling beside a tiny flower-covered patch of earth. Her hand trembles as she places something there, small, delicate, a collar. You freeze, suddenly understanding. It's a pet's grave. Yes. Even in a world where humans struggled to stay fed, clothed, and unplagued, people still buried their animals with tenderness. Mainstream medieval chronicles don't always highlight it, but evidence of animal mourning is everywhere. From personal letters to church records to odd carvings on grave sites, people left signs that their pets mattered. Not just functionally, but emotionally. Some were buried in gardens, others beneath kitchen hearths, and still others beside their human companions, especially in noble families. A few wealthy lords even commissioned tiny effigies, marble dogs curled at the feet of their tombs, a sculpted reminder of the one who slept beside them every night. Quirky tidbit: in 15th century Paris, a widow reportedly built a small shrine to her deceased parrot. The parrot had learned to mimic her husband's voice after he passed away. She claimed it gave her comfort during long winters. When the bird died, she wept as though a piece of her husband died again. Some called her mad, others called her faithful. Historians still debate how widespread these mourning rituals were. Were they unique to the wealthy who could afford such sentiments? Or did poorer families mourn more quietly, more privately, perhaps in whispers before the fire, or by lighting a candle for a dog who never came home? You step away from the window. Behind you, your own dog thumps his tail once, still half asleep. The cat, meanwhile, is licking her paw with calculated indifference. You remember a neighbor once telling you that animals didn't go to heaven. "They have no souls," she said. But she'd said it while crying over her goat, who had followed her through 3 famines and a flood. You didn't argue. Because in a world where death was common, where disease and war and famine knocked at the door every season, the ones who stayed, who listened, who warmed your feet, who watched you cry in the dark, were not so easily dismissed. To lose one of them wasn't just the loss of utility, it was the loss of a presence, of habit, of a small beating heart that had made the world feel a little less cold. You return to bed, nudging the dog gently. He stirs, gives you a look that says, "Was someone mourning again? Should I do something?" Then he leans his head against your shin. The cat climbs onto your chest, territorial, insistent, and you let her. And in that soft tangle of fur and limbs and breath, you understand. Love doesn't ask permission. It just settles in. Sometimes under your blanket, sometimes under your skin, and when it leaves, you grieve it, even in a world that barely had time for grief. You've barely made it out the door today before you hear the news. "Did you hear?" the blacksmith's boy whispers, eyes wide. "They put the rooster on trial." You blink. "Whose rooster?" "Martin the potter's." You stare at him. "For what?" A beat. Then, witchcraft. Or maybe waking the priest too early. Or pecking at the wrong vegetables. I don't know. You sigh. Because welcome to another oddly specific corner of medieval life. Pet crimes. It's true. Animals could be, and sometimes were, tried for misdeeds. Not just chased off or punished, but actually put on trial. Like people, with a judge. And occasionally, with a lawyer. Mainstream historians confirm that animal trials, as ridiculous as they sound now, were a real and documented phenomenon between the 13th and 18th centuries. Pigs were the most common offenders, usually accused of attacking children or damaging property. But dogs, goats, horses, and even birds made the docket. And yes, the occasional cat. One especially infamous case from 1386 involved a sow in France that was dressed in human clothes, tried for killing a child, and executed publicly. It's unsettling. And it says as much about human fear as it does about medieval justice. But sometimes the crimes were stranger. There are records of a rooster being charged with unnatural behavior for allegedly laying an egg, a donkey accused of indecent acts, a dog excommunicated after biting a bishop's ankle. Here's your quirky tidbit of the night. In some regions, animals were actually appointed defense counsel. These lawyers would argue that the beast acted from instinct, not malice, or that the blame lay with the owner for improper supervision. Imagine standing in a court, solemnly defending your cow's honor. Historians still argue why this happened. Some see it as a warped but genuine attempt to impose moral order. Others think it was symbolic, a way to publicly express outrage, to reinforce the rule of law by showing that no being, human or animal, was above it. Either way, it reflected a world where animals were deeply entangled with human life, so much so that they could become targets of human justice, superstition, or fury. And while trials were rare for true pets, the dog who slept at your feet was more likely to be pitied than prosecuted. The boundary between affection and accusation could be thin. You remember not long ago, a neighbor's dog went missing after barking too loudly during a sermon. No one said anything directly, but the priest's look was enough. The dog never came back. Even cats, especially black ones, were suspect during certain eras, linked with sorcery or spirits despite their well-documented mousing talents. It's a strange contrast. One moment they're curled in your lap, the next they're being whispered about in the town square. And yet, despite it all, the fear, the gossip, the strange entanglement with human justice, people kept their animals close, trusted them, needed them, loved them. Because when the shouting died down, and the doors were bolted for the night, and the fire was low, and the wind scratched at the shutters, who else was there? Your dog, your cat, your rooster, hopefully not on trial. You finish your chores and return home, the image of that accused rooster still in your head. When you lie back down that night, your dog curls beside you as usual. The cat stretches across your hip, and you think, no judge, no bishop, no whispered superstition could change this, because whatever the laws say, whatever the records claim, you know who wakes you with warmth, who watches you while you sleep, and who listens, patiently, quietly, when no one else is awake. And in your eyes, that's innocence enough. It's Christmas Eve. The fire is down to a soft red glow, and the air smells like rosemary, smoke, and something faintly sweet. Maybe cider. The house is quiet, unusually so. Even the pig in the corner is settled, snoring gently beneath a blanket someone threw over him for the occasion. You lie on your back, staring at the wooden rafters above, heart just a little faster than usual. Not because of the cold, not because of a bad dream, but because of the stories. Tonight is the night the animals might speak. That's what the old tales say anyway. If you stay up, if you listen closely, very closely, just as the clock strikes midnight, you might hear your dog whisper your name, or your cat recite a prayer. It sounds silly. It is silly. And yet, here you are, listening. The belief wasn't unique to your village. All across medieval Europe, there were variations of this story. In France, they said oxen knelt at midnight to honor the birth of Christ. In parts of Germany and Poland, it was said that barn animals received the gift of speech, just for a moment. But if anyone heard them, they'd regret it. You weren't supposed to listen, just let it happen, which, of course, made it irresistible. Here's your quirky tidbit. In a few rural regions, children were kept awake on purpose, tucked under cloaks near the barn doors, told to wait in silence, not to hear what the animals said, but just to witness it. Because the idea that animals might be given a voice, even briefly, was a kind of magic, a recognition that they were more than tools, more than meat or fur or function. And maybe, just maybe, it was a way of saying thank you. Mainstream historians trace this tradition to a blend of Christian symbolism and older pagan customs. The ox and the donkey appear in early nativity art, even though they're not mentioned in the Bible. Their presence was poetic, quiet observers of the sacred. Over time, that symbolism grew into story, into myth, into whispered midnight legends. Historians still debate the origins. Was it a Christianization of older solstice rituals? A way to teach empathy to children? Or just a bit of winter whimsy that gave folks something to smile about between fasts and frostbite? Does it matter? Because tonight, as your dog breathes deeply beside you and the cat purrs with uncharacteristic contentment, you find yourself holding your breath. Midnight is near. Outside, the wind has stilled. The trees are motionless. The chickens, for once, are silent. You don't expect anything, not really, but you listen anyway, just in case. The pig stirs. The dog sighs and flops over with a grunt. The cat, because of course she does, meows softly and smacks you in the face with her tail. You blink. Was that? Probably not, but maybe. And that's the magic of it, really. That little flicker of belief. That warm, improbable hope that the creatures who share your bed and your bread might carry more inside them than instinct, that their eyes might reflect thoughts, that their hearts might mirror yours. You roll onto your side, curling into the warmth between your dog and your cat. No one speaks, but that's okay. You've heard enough. because the stories themselves say more than any whisper ever could. They say, "You are not alone. Not tonight. Not ever." The night is heavy now. That deep kind of darkness that presses gently on your eyelids, inviting them to stay closed just a little longer. Everything in the room feels slower, calmer, like even time is beginning to curl up and rest. The dog at your side has stopped twitching in his sleep. The cat has shifted down toward your feet, stretched into a perfect crescent, her breathing almost imperceptible. Even the pig, a champion snorer, has gone quiet, leaving only the soft hiss of the coals fading in the hearth. You feel it in your bones, that sense that the night is folding in on itself, tucking everyone under one great unseen blanket. And yet, something still stirs in you. A thought you've been avoiding. A question as old as the hay-stuffed mattress beneath you. What happens to our animals when they're gone? You hate thinking about it. Even in a world full of famine, illness, and war, even when people barely lived to see middle age, this was the kind of loss that carved deepest, quietly, without the spectacle of funerals or the clanging of bells, just an empty corner, a cold spot on the bed. And yet, medieval people did think about it. Some mourned in whispers, others in gestures, a little food left out, a favorite blanket untouched. And some went further, burying their pets with tokens, wrapping them in cloth, planting flowers above their resting places. There's a small churchyard in northern England, according to local lore, where 5 noblemen are buried with their hounds. Not beside them, with them, curled at their feet, just as they'd been in life. And here's your quirky detail. One 14th century knight requested that his favorite hunting dog's collar be placed on his tomb, so that in heaven it might find me again. Knee jest, no shame, just hope. Historians still argue whether this kind of devotion was common or rare. Was it seen as eccentric or quietly understood? Did priests turn a blind eye to pet graves in hallowed ground? Or did they too feel the sting of such losses? It's hard to say. But what's clear is this. Even in a time when animals had to justify their presence, when they pulled carts, caught vermin, guarded doors, some were loved beyond their function. Some were family. You shift again, your hand resting on the soft fur of the dog's back. He stirs slightly, thumps his tail once, then goes still. You can feel his heartbeat, slow and steady, beneath your palm. And you wonder, someday, long from now, when the straw is fresh and the night is cold again, will someone else lie here? Will they feel the same warmth? Will they hear stories about dogs like yours, cats like hers, pigs that grunted lullabies? Maybe they will, and maybe that's how love survives. Through stories, through shared beds, through the silence that carries memory like a scent on the air. Because in the end, this story isn't really about animals, is it? It's about company. About surviving long nights not by yourself, but with another heartbeat close by. And now, you feel your own slowing. Not from fear, not from grief, but from peace. Because tonight, you sleep with warmth on both sides, with memories tucked beneath your ribs, and with the quiet knowing that if the animals ever do speak, it won't be in words. It'll be in presence. Always, always presence. So now, as the last embers fade and the quiet stretches long and low across your room, I want you to feel the weight of this story begin to lift gently from your shoulders. No more castles, no more hay, no more whispered trials or midnight tales, just the softness of your blanket, the steady sound of your breath, and the knowledge that even in the most distant corners of history, someone else once lay as you do now, with a dog at their feet, a cat curled behind their knees, a chicken somewhere nearby making suspicious rustling noises, and the same simple hope that they wouldn't have to face the dark alone. Let your shoulders drop. Let your jaw unclench. Let your fingers relax into the sheets. And picture it. A fire burned low. A quiet room full of sleeping bodies, human and otherwise. No one stirring, No one speaking, just warm, quiet presence, the kind that doesn't demand, doesn't explain, doesn't leave. You are safe here. And while the world outside may still rush, still worry, still spin, this moment belongs only to you, to your breath, to your stillness. You've come through centuries tonight, through straw and stone and tiny stories of silent loyalty. So now, you can let go, let yourself drift. No need to chase thoughts or memories. Let them fade. Let them curl up at your feet and sleep. And when you wake, whenever that is, you'll carry a little of this with you. A little warmth, a little history, and a little bit of fur on your blanket. Sweet dreams.